Hello and welcome to New Central Television. I am Likon Obanjo. The top stories at this hour. Supreme Court strikes out a suit by the 36 state governments challenging the federal government's application of recovered looted funds. Security operatives arrest 20 suspects for hacking JAM CBT servers. Hundreds of Libyan protesters flood streets of Tripoli demanding resignation of Prime Minister Beiba. Details to come your way shortly. Let's begin with judicial matters. The Supreme Court has struck out a suit filed by 36 state governments and the Nigeria Governors Forum challenging the federal government's management of recovered looted assets. A 7-member panel ruled that the case was wrongly brought before the Apex Court, stating that only the Federal High Court has the jurisdiction to hear such matters. The plaintiffs alleged that between 2015 and 2021, the federal government recovered over 1.8 trillion naira in cash and assets, but failed to remit the funds into the Federation accounts. Instead, they claim the funds were diverted into other accounts, including the Consolidated Revenue Fund. They further accused the federal government of violating constitutional provisions and sought a court order compelling the full remittance of the recovered funds, along with a detailed account of unremitted assets. To discuss this, we're joined by a legal practitioner, Dr. Sam Amadi. Dr. Amadi, thank you so much for joining us to talk about this.
Yes.
Now,
Yes.
you're welcome, sir. Now, the ruling determined that the suit was improperly instituted before the Apex Court, as the subject matter fell under the jurisdiction of the Federal High Court. And some people are wondering that shouldn't the governors or the plaintiffs have known better?
Yeah, you see, that this, the Constitution allows states to approach the Supreme Court in original jurisdiction without going to the lower courts in instances where there's a dispute between the federal government and any state on constitutional issues. I think the decision is to say that this is a matter that the federal court should handle. This is not, that does not fall within what the Supreme Court consider the nature of dispute that should come to the Supreme Court. It's also a way of the Supreme Court maybe limiting matters it will take on original jurisdiction. The Supreme Court is a policy court. A lot of matter come to the Supreme Court, and maybe as a matter of policy, the Supreme Court would like not to take matters that the High Court, Federal High Court, in this case, can handle, and then on appeal, Court of Appeal before Supreme Court. So it's part of exercise of discretion of the Supreme Court to reject taking this matter on original jurisdiction, even though arguably someone can say that the nature of the claim is also a matter of dispute between the federal and the state, a matter relating to how to manage recovered loot. But the Supreme Court takes the view that it doesn't fall within the narrow aperture of matters it can take on its original jurisdiction, and that its better forum would be the Federal High Court.
Okay, so having clarified that, let's now look at the issue in total. Now, did the federal government err in its application over recovered looted funds as being claimed by the governors?
Sorry, I didn't get that clear. So what? Yep.
So I said, did the government err in its application over recovered looted funds? Because the accusation is that the government was meant to actually remit the funds recovered from the looters into a particular account, that is the Consolidated Revenue account instead.
Sure.
So I'd like to get clarification if the government actually erred on that.
Well, that's a matter that ought to have been determined by the Supreme Court that will invariably go to the Federal Court. But look at it this way. Dispute formation depends on the facts emphasized. There are two accounts here. One is the Federation account, which receives all money that's meant to be shared for the three levels of government. So, for example, most of our oil receipts go to the Federation account. Now, there's also the Consolidated Revenue account, which is an account for the management of the federal liabilities and obligations of the federal government. So what the states are saying is that this loot recovered ought to go to the Federation account. which is an account that has constitutional framework for distribution between federal, state, and local government. What the federal government seems to be saying by the action they have taken is that this recovered loot are revenue due to them. So they exercise their federal power, recover this loot through the EFCC or the ICPC, which are federal agencies, but which also exercise jurisdiction over the states as the Supreme Court has allowed. So in a way, you could say that there are grounds for both parties to make their claim. For the states, since some of these loots are also loots that belong to states, meaning that when the federal government recovers this loot, some of the money are stolen or taken away from accounts that do not only belong to the federal government. Then it makes sense that perhaps states themselves should share in these loots. For example, there are many proceeds of corruption which the AFCC have recovered, for example, belong to Bayelsa State government. And always the argument has been that it should go back to the states where these funds are looted in the first instance. So that's a strong case for the state. But apparently what the federal government is focusing on is that this is reward for its recovery, its invocation of prosecutorial power within its legal authorization. And therefore, the state government, federal government sees it as rent, as recoveries, as revenue that belongs to them. And that's why they put it in inflation account. I would say that this is a matter that perhaps the Supreme Court should have entertained because it has implication for managing corruption proceeds in the future. But at this point, it will have to be resolved by the court. My opinion, personal opinion, would be that maybe there are stronger arguments for the states to claim some level of entitlement, especially as some of these loots may originally have come from assets that belong to the states.
So whether or not this is concluded by the Supreme Court, that would mean that the plaintiff's statement that the asset recovery regulation contradicts the provisions of the Constitution is actually valid. And maybe there's a need for a realignment of these laws to remove ambiguity.
Absolutely. So if the court didn't say you can't adjudicate, they says go to the proper forum, which is the federal court in the view of the Supreme Court justice. So at this point, but what is clear is that there's an apparent contradiction between the act itself and the Constitution in terms of how to manage this. So the main thing that can happen beyond the litigation is for the states to lobby the National Assembly to effect some constitutional reform. Again, that process is long and oftentimes within the control of the federal government. So if the federal government would like to keep this fund, because the federal government especially this government, is focused on tax, they want revenue, they want more money. So I see a fight. They will not allow an amendment to happen so easily. And considering that the National Assembly is more in the control of the federal government than of the states, there's an asymmetry of power. The result might be that the act may not be amended as quickly. The best approach is a judicial adjudication, but that means they have to go quickly to the Federal High Court and hope that the federal government, if they lose, do not go to the Court of Appeal or go to the Supreme Court. Another way, as a lawyer, is that if they go to the Federal High Court, they could frame question for determination under the Constitution. There's a special provision for taking matters that have not been decided before up to the Supreme Court quickly, so they can frame it and raise that question for determination for the Court of Appeal to the Supreme Court without waiting to adjudicate fully the main suit at the Federal High Court. That will give them some speed in this matter.
Okay. Thank you so much for the clarity, Dr. Sam Amadi, on this particular story. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Meanwhile, the federal government has finalized plans to sell a massive estate linked to former CBN Governor Godwin Emefiele to low and middle-income Nigerians. The property recovered by the EFCC in December 2024 comprises 753 housing units and spans over 150,000 square meters. It is the largest asset recovery since the Commission's founding in 2003. The estate was forfeited following a court order despite Emefiele's failed legal bid to reclaim it. On May 20, EFCC Chairman Ola Olukoyede handed the property over to the Minister of Housing, Ahmed Dangiwa. The estate remains under construction, but the government promises affordable access under President Bola Tinubu's renewed hope agenda. Sales will be conducted via the ministry's portal with flexible payment plans, including mortgage and rent-to-own options. Well, to talk more about this, we are joined by a rights activist and a public affairs analyst, Victor Oj. Mr. Oj, it's nice to have you around on the news.
Thank you for having me here.
Okay, so according to the FCC, this asset discovery was the largest since the agency was created. What does this suggest about the oversight of high-ranking officials?
The fact remains that whether it is the highest recovery or the lowest recovery, it's inconsequential because we all know how the system works. We all know that Nigerians no longer have trust on the EFCC because of their selective vindication or their selective means of fighting corruption. There are a lot of other worst cases that in the past we know that ICPC has made some recoveries, of which we know that the former Attorney General was accused that he told the team that did those international recovery and local recovery to release those forfeiture back to the persons that were accused. So Nigerians have really lost trust in EFCC. Nigerians don't even care. They are not interested because, okay, let's talk about Abacha loot. Can you point any infrastructural investment, whether it's security, whether it's health care system, whether it's education, that the Abacha loot has been invested in? What has Nigerians benefited from all their loot? This is just a window dressing. And to me, in as much as in other climes, this will be an example for transparency and accountability from the government. But here in Nigeria, where we are, and the reality today is that our people, the Nigerians, don't even trust the EFCC. Even despite we know that they have handed these 753, which is the highest recovery ever in Nigeria history in EFCC of recovery of asset recovery. We all know that the same Ministry of Federal Ministry of Housing, we can't even still trust them that these housing are going to go to the low or average Nigerians. We all know how it works, that eventually the elites are going to share it for themselves. So to me, an average Nigerian is not interested in information as such because we don't trust our criminal justice system.
Earlier on, you talked about some other high-profile cases that have gone underreported or not investigated. I don't know if there's any that comes to mind that you think the government should go after if we're looking at stamping out corruption in the country.
It's a million and one if we should talk about fighting corruption. But we all know the truth that the current leadership of APC, they are not interested in accountability. They are not interested in in recovery of assets or loot. Whatever they are engaged in is for targeted individuals. Look, Nigerians know, even a brainless fowl knows that the current APC leadership, they are not really interested in fighting corruption, whether at federal or state level. You can't point any government, whether a governor or our current president, that he is interested in advocating or fighting corruption in entirety. So I can't start coming on a national or a global media platform to start pointing fingers when I know that it will be swept under the carpet. We all know what is going on currently in the south of Nigeria, how the president is manipulating the south of Nigeria into a one-party state, and yet they are coming to explain to us, they are trying to make us feel comfortable. When we all know that the beauty of democracy is when there is opposition. It's not when it's a one-party state. Look at United States of America. It's not a one-party state. The Democrats are there, the Republicans are there, the Conservatives are there. So why will you be trying to convince us that you tilting and manipulating the system into a one-party state, all because you are interested in 2027, whereas we are yet to get to 2 years in governance, instead of you to focus on how to deliver dividends of democracy to our people? There's insecurity, there's housing crisis, there's a lot of crisis going on, there's lack of job creation by these governments, there's no plans for the youth, There are a lot of crises that this current administration should focus on, but no, they are focused on power 2027. So Nigerians have lost trust in the system.
So basically, what you mean is that there is nothing that can be done because you've actually, come up with several allegations against the ruling All Progressives Congress. But then there should be something that can be done to ensure accountability. I don't know if there are any thoughts you'd like to share with us.
There is nothing that can be done, and Nigerians have lost hope. They have lost trust. Nigerians have lost everything. Nigerians are currently living on. Like they are just living on God, leaving this current administration to God, the way Abacha was left to God. At some point, Nigerians gave up on Abacha. And at some point, God answered the prayers of Nigerians.
Okay.
That is where we are now. What happened in the military regime, that is where we are now. Nigerians have lost hope in this administration.
Okay, so before I like to go, Victor, I'd just like to find out, we know that there are political lapses, there are financial lapses, when it comes to regulation and implementation. In as much as you might have lost hope, and a couple of Nigerians might also, of course, might have lost hope in the possibility of a better Nigeria. If we were to look at a saner climb, what are the right things that need to be done in order to ensure that we are able to scale the hurdle that's actually pulling Nigeria back to have some sort of a better society?
If you go to the Asian tiger region of this world, I'm talking about China, Japan, Indonesia, Thailand, irrespective of who you are, if you violate or breach the law, you are going to pay for it. There's accountability. If you engage in corrupt practice, if you engage in lack of quality construction of infrastructure, you will be hanged. But here in Nigeria, we don't see things like that. Not until the elite, the low, the average are held accountable, just the way we see it in other climes. Nigeria can never get it right. The only way to make the system right and better is for us to know that everybody must be held accountable. Everybody must be held accountable. Not until we get to that part or that level. Like you see in Malaysia when you land in the airport, that if you are caught with drugs, that you are going to be executed. That is it. Whether you are an elite, whether you are an average, whether you are on a low class, that is what is going to be your fate. Whether you go to China, in Asian tigers, that region, when you talk about accountability, give it to them. So our government, if they are interested in our people, if they are interested in our people gaining back their trust, there should be accountability. But I doubt if this APT-led administration is interested in fighting corruption or corrupt practice.
All right, thank you so much, Victor J. We hope that we get it right and adhering to the rule of law in the country. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us.
Thank you.
We go on a break on the news. When we return, security operatives arrest 20 suspects for hacking JAM CBT servers. The details will come your way shortly. Join us again. Many thanks for staying with us. The Federal Capital Territory Administration says that it will commence the taking over 4,794 land titles revoked in March this year. The special advisor to the FCT Minister on Public Communications and Social Media, in company of the Director of Lands of the FCTA and the Director of the FCT Development Control, spoke to newsmen in Abuja, saying the revoked lands form part of the 8,375 land plots owing ground rents from 1 year to 43 years, which were earlier flagged by the administration. Now, away from that, the practice of infanticide in some communities of Abuja, which shocked the world several years ago, is still ongoing. While there's been a call to stop the practice within and around about 27 FCT communities identified to perpetrate the act, which involves killing of children with albinism, children who lost their mothers during childbirth, and children from multiple births, also known as twins. Rights organizations are calling for adequate policy frameworks that will end the practice. The lawmaker representing the Federal Capital Territory, Ireti Kingibe, has visited a shelter housing some of these children rescued from their communities, assuring that she will seek legislation to end the practice. New Central's correspondent Aishat Saliu reports.
Infanticide, known as the murder of children for one cultural belief or another, is shockingly still being practiced in communities around the Federal Capital Territory and has been described archaic and barbaric. Data from International Development Organization, the Action Aid Nigeria, reveals that infanticide is still being practiced in several communities in Kwali, Kuje, Wawelda, and parts of the Abuja Municipal Area Council, all in the FCTA. However, while efforts are underway to eradicate these harmful practices over the years, some rescue missions have recorded successes in relocating some of these children, often regarded as rejects by their communities, and providing shelters for their care and development.
Many of them before them were wrapped in the bodies of their mothers and buried. Many of them in the past. And then you have twins, whether you are twins or triplets or quadruplets, is a taboo. And so we have so many. If you go to these communities, about 69 communities. When we started, so if you go to these communities today, you will not meet a twin.
Some of these rescued children are calling on the government to help tackle the socio-cultural issues leading to the practice, putting the lives of vulnerable and helpless children in danger and outlawing it once and for all.
I lost my mother when she gave birth to me. In my community, this marked me for death. When Pastor Stevens and Dr. Chinwe found me, I was a day away from being killed. They rescued me and brought me to Vine Heritage Home. I'm not alone. Many children are killed or abandoned because they are twin, albinos, and disability, or because their mother died in childbirth. This belief had no peace in modern Nigeria.
We need special task forces to identify and stop child marriage. We need community education programs that teach families the danger of early marriage, like Action Aid are doing in some communities of intervention. And we need scholarship programs so that the families see education as more than marriage for their daughters.
The lawmaker representing the Federal Capital Territory in the Senate, Ireti Kingibe, also visited one of these shelters, assuring the children of a bill to end the practice of infanticide aimed at protecting them from harmful traditional practices and beliefs.
I now realize that there's so much work to be done. There's some challenges I knew, like access to clean water, but I never, ever, until a few weeks ago, knew about the infanticides. And I give you my word that I will bring out a special bill.
The Child Rights Act is expected to provide adequate protection for vulnerable children. However, experts believe that with proper implementation, it can achieve its desired purpose. In Abuja, for News Central, Aishat Salihu.
Well, thanks for being there. Now, before going on a break, we brought you a story about the practice of infanticide in some communities in the Federal Capital Territory, Abuja. And this time, we'll be talking to our correspondent, Aishat Saliu, to draw more details from her as regards experience while having to put the story together. Aishat, thank you so much for this story that you've brought to us. But then, what specific cultural or maybe religious beliefs would you say drive the practice of infanticide according to your findings?
Thank you so much, Lekan, for having me on the news. First of all, I'd say that there are still some barbaric and archaic cultural and religious beliefs in some communities. And it would surprise you to know that as much as one would think the Federal Capital Territory, Abuja, is a developed area, there are still remote communities in the capital city of Nigeria, where these this harmful practices still go on. I mean, how can we still have these cultures in practice. I mean, people talking about because you have children that come with the condition of albinism, or children who are twins, triplets, and the likes, or children whose mothers died at birth. Because of that, you then go on and murder these children and say they are not worthy of being alive. Thank God for the intervention of some homes, some shelter homes, who go into these communities to rescue these children and bring them to the shelter homes. But then what drives this practice would be some very barbaric cultural norms that has come to stay, and then people keep practicing this, and it's very sad.
Now, did you encounter some sort of resistance from maybe local communities or leaders when investigating the story?
Now, regarding that, I intend to do a follow-up story on this particular report, because this one is just about, the visit of the FCT, the Senator Ireti Kingibe, to this shelter home, because she said she was not even aware that there is infanticide going on in the FCT. But then we're going to do a follow-up on this particular story, where we will visit these communities, because we have done it before, but then they're saying the practice of infanticide is still going on. We have just found out now that it's still going on. So we intend to do an in-depth report, investigative, to go into these communities to see how come these things are still practiced, and then what's the mindset of this traditional, would I say, leaders in the community, that they have not seen reasons to see that, okay, we should stop this practice. Is this something that they are passing from one generation to another, and they see it as just a normal thing to do? We just want to understand why this is still happening, and also hear from victims, people, the children who have had to go through this. I mean, people who have survived it.
Fantastic. I'm hoping to be able to get that done. But then before you go, I know that you would have had interactions with some of the advocates against this practice. Are there any existing laws, maybe that can be, probably even policies, that can be brought on board to actually address infanticide or maybe related harmful traditional practices, not only in the FCT in this case, I mean, in Nigeria?
Okay, so at the moment, I'd say, according to reports by the rights organization, that's Action Aid Nigeria, and they have been mobilizing action towards the abolition of infanticide. And they did say that they have brought out these findings, and then they are seeking the lawmakers. That is why the senator representing the FCT has now gone there to see firsthand for herself, and she promised right there that she would sponsor a special bill to protect the children, and also make sure that there is the proper implementation of the Child Rights Act in the FCT.
So one thing I'm particular about is not only the enactment of the law, is the implementation of the law. One of the kids talked about access to adequate education, talked about protection from such practices. Is there a way we are assured that by the time this legislation comes into play, it will be enacted and it will help protect these kids and the ones that are yet to be born?
Well, it remains to be seen, the commitment by the lawmaker who has gone firsthand to see for herself. Well, the children are, part of their demands would be that they are asking that there are they're facing some of these challenges in the FCT, in their communities, and this is what perpetuates these actions. I mean, if you allow for child abuse and also child marriage, amongst other concerns for the children, it just then go on to promote this harmful cultural practice. But then it remains to be seen if there would be the political will, if there will be that deliberate action on the part of the lawmaker and perhaps even the minister of the FCT and all other ministries, department, agencies that are involved in child rights protection, just so that this practice of infanticide is abolished from the FCT and even other parts of Nigeria where it may be happening.
Thank you so much, Aisha Salihu, for talking to us about this. We hope that something will be done to put a stop to it. Thanks for sharing the details with us. Let's move on now. President Bola Tinubu's transmission of the Rivers State Appropriation Bill to the National Assembly has sparked reactions from the people of Rivers. While some have welcomed the move, others argue that the president's executive intervention in the state's affairs is becoming excessive. News Central's Biola Festo spoke with residents and stakeholders and now brings us their perspectives.
On Thursday, President Bola Tinubu officially submitted the 2025 Appropriation Bill for Rivers State to the National Assembly. This follows the suspension of both the state's House of Assembly and the governor in March. Although unprecedented in Nigeria's political history, some stakeholders in Rivers State argue that the president's decision was necessary to keep the state functioning in the absence of elected leadership.
The state must operate with a budget. And the National Assembly already has set up a committee to oversight the functions and activities of the sole administrator. So for us to move forward, we must have a budget. Because spending vast money without a budget means recklessness. And at the end of the day, it will lead to embezzlements. So that's why the president felt it was necessary for him to present the budget on behalf of Rivers State Public.
Constitutionally, the president brought in a sole administrator because of what happened in Rivers State. So whatever the sole administrator does, as far as it is to protect lives and property, as far as it is to give governance to our people, it's okay.
However, civil society organizations in the state have expressed concern that the people may be denied meaningful participation in public hearings on the bill.
In the state assembly where they make law, people come for public hearing, and they have first day of the hearing about the bill. People study it and make inputs, and it represents the interests of diverse views of people from the state. But in this case, how will Rivers people be represented there? Is it that it is just the politicians at the National Assembly who will say, yes, we want this or we don't want that? This is our concern.
Suspended Governor Siminalayi Fubara had initially proposed a 1.188 trillion naira budget amid the ongoing political crisis. Interestingly, the president's newly submitted budget of 1.48 trillion naira surpasses that figure by more than 200 billion naira.
We saw the margin in space of the amount. The last budget by the governor, his budget was around 1.3 trillion naira. One will be also forced to ask. Now, within the space of 2 months, 348 billion naira was added to the budget. Is it another case of padding? We don't know.
The budget proposed is a little bit higher than what the suspended governor did. Probably the technical team that set up the budget may have sat down, looked at other infrastructural programs to be implemented. And I don't think anything is wrong with that, because we need to move Rivers State forward. We need to carry out other capital projects.
Key questions persist in Rivers State. Who advised the president on the budgetary allocations? Who authored the bill? And what technical criteria were used in its preparation? While the president may exercise some discretionary powers, stakeholders insist that transparency and accountability remain the fundamental in a democratic society. In Rivers State for News Central, Biola Festus.
Well, I'll tell you that the Nigerian National Petroleum Company Limited has announced the planned shutdown of the Port Harcourt refinery for maintenance commencing May 24, 2025. In a statement issued on Saturday, NNPC's Chief Corporate Communications Officer Femi Shoneye said the shutdown is part of a broader maintenance and sustainability assessment aimed at enhancing the refinery's efficiency and long-term performance. NNPC Limited assured the public of a smooth and transparent process, adding that it is working closely with stakeholders, including the Nigerian Midstream and Downstream Petroleum Regulatory Authority. The company also reaffirmed its commitment to energy security and pledged to provide regular updates through its website, media platforms, and official channels as the maintenance work progresses. To education now, security operatives have arrested 20 individuals for allegedly hacking the computer-based Unified Tertiary Matriculation Examination conducted by the Joint Admissions and Matriculation Board in 2025. The arrests were carried out in Abuja by operatives from the Department of State Services and the Nigeria Police Force. Report indicates that the suspects are part of a wider syndicate believed to involve over 100 people, specializing in hacking the servers of examination bodies such as JAM and the National Examinations Council. According to security sources, the suspects have confessed to deliberately sabotaging the computer-based testing system, allegedly to undermine JAMB's credibility and discourage the use of CBT in future examinations conducted by NECO and the West African Examinations Council. Bringing you stories from other parts of Africa, around 100 demonstrators gathered in Dakar, Senegal, to call on the government to introduce harsher penalties for homosexuality. The protest highlights ongoing societal tensions in the West African nation, where same-sex relations are already criminalized under a law punishing acts against nature with up to 5 years in prison. Protesters urged lawmakers to adopt stricter measures, aligning with a push by a local organization currently lobbying Parliament for legal reform. While homosexuality remains heavily stigmatized in Senegal, the initiative has sparked concern among human rights advocates who warn that tougher laws could further marginalize the LGBTQ community. No official government response has been issued yet regarding the demonstrators' demands or the legislative proposal.
Pour combattre l'homosexualité, comme on l'avait fait l'année passée avec le président Macky Sall. Bon, on a combattu pour que, l'homosexualité dans ce pays, on ne le tolère pas.
Parce que l'État qui est là actuellement au pouvoir, il nous avait promis de criminaliser l'homosexualité une fois au pouvoir. Mais aujourd'hui, ils sont à 1 an au pouvoir et jusque-là, on ne voit pas de réaction par rapport à l'homosexualité. Donc nous, c'est ce que nous demandons. Parce que si vous voyez aujourd'hui tout ce monde, donc c'est pour dire non à l'homosexualité. Donc tout ce que nous demandons aujourd'hui, c'est que l'État assume ses responsabilités. Que l'État prenne toutes ses responsabilités. Donc il n'a qu'à criminaliser l'homosexualité.
In North Africa, for the second consecutive Friday, hundreds of demonstrators flooded the streets of Tripoli, demanding the resignation of Libya's UN-recognized government of national unity. The protests, driven by growing public frustration, are aimed squarely at Prime Minister Abdelhamid Dbeibah and his administration. Citizens cite deepening political gridlock, deteriorating security, and worsening living conditions as reasons for their unrest. Chants and banners filled the capital as demonstrators call for new leadership and urgent reforms. The latest protests highlight the mounting pressure on the transitional government to deliver on its promises and steer Libya towards stability.
الشعب الليبي يقرر في مصيره في هذا المكان وقال كلمته لا لحكومات جديدة ولا لكيانات سياسية جديدة تضعف الدولة الليبية. نبوا انتخابات المجلس الرئاسي أمام الآن موقف تاريخي لينقذ ليبيا.
اليوم نشوف التظاهر السلمي داخل الميدان الحقيقة شيء إيجابي وشيء مفرح، نطالبوا فيه بإسقاط الحكومة وأن نشوفوا حكومة أخرى ممكن.
In sports, the Alake of Edaland, Oba Adidotun Badibo, has praised the ongoing National Sports Festival in Ogun State during comparisons to the 2024 Paris Olympics opening ceremony. Speaking at the event, the monarch highlighted the festival's potential economic boost, citing the presence of over 20,000 athletes and thousands of spectators. He expressed pride in the state's hosting capabilities and urged young athletes to embrace teamwork and strive for excellence. Reflecting on his role during the 2006 edition, also held in Ogun State, he expressed optimism that the festival would foster national unity and prepare Nigerian athletes for top-level global competitions.
We did the same thing 19 years ago, and I was here. So this is the second time we'll be hosting the whole of Nigeria. But this time around, the celebration, we're really very proud to be an Egbama.
Clinton Okute stole the spotlight at the 22nd National Sports Festival in Ogun State by breaking 3 swimming records he previously held. Representing Team Delta, Okute clocked 2 hours, 10 minutes, 6 seconds in the 200-meter butterfly, bettering his own mark. He followed up with a record-breaking 400-meter freestyle at 4 minutes, 14 seconds and set another benchmark in the 200 meters individuals medley. With 6 gold and 1 silver medal to his name, Okute's record-smashing performances are fueling Delta's push to retain their national crown. Elsewhere, Team Delta's female footballers booked a semi-final spot with a 2-1 win over Team Lagos, while the female Abula team also advanced after beating Team Oyo in straight sets to enter the medal round. And that's all at this hour, but before we go, we look at our top stories again. Supreme Court has struck out a suit by the 36 state governments challenging the federal government's application of recovered looted funds. Security operatives have arrested 20 suspects for hacking JAM CBT server. We also told you that hundreds of Libyan protesters have flooded the streets of Tripoli, demanding resignation of Prime Minister Beba. Now, you can send your eyewitness report to the WhatsApp number on the screen. And don't forget to follow us on social media. We are at News Central TV. Do watch us live on DSTV channel 422, GoTV channel 23, Star Times channel 274, Arvo TV, and YouTube. Many thanks for watching. I am Lekon Onobanjo.